The letter my mother left behind did not have an envelope, a name or a date, only a command that I burn it unread. And 3 weeks before my wedding, I broke that promise and learned I was about to marry my own brother. My name is Darnell Reichert, and I restore old courthouses for a living, which means I am good at reading what people tried to hide under later layers of paint and plaster. My mother, Colleen, died in a small rental house outside Tupelo, Mississippi, after a long fight with a lung illness that stole her voice long before it took her breath. On her last clear afternoon, she gripped my wrist with a strength that did not belong to a dying woman and said there was a quilted throw in the hall closet, the blue one with the torn binding, and I was to destroy it without opening the lining, no matter what I found. She made me swear it on the little music box my father had carved, and I said yes, because that is what you do when someone you love is leaving and wants peace. Colleen passed 2 days later with the window cracked open like she was listening for something outside. Before we continue, remember that this is still a small channel, and I could really use your support. Please like the video and subscribe. It's free, and it helps more than you know. Alone in that hushed house, I found the quilt heavier than any blanket should be. I should have taken it to the burn barrel. Instead, my fingers found the loose stitching at the corner and pulled. A folded paper fell onto the worn rug, yellow at the edges, written in my mother's careful schoolteacher hand. "If you are reading this, I failed you," it began. "You are not the daughter of Russell. You are the daughter of Boyd Ulran. Boyd knows. He has always known. The arrangement was made before you were born. Forgive me if you can." I sat on the floor until the light left the room. 6 lines had rewritten 32 years of my life. Boyd Ulran owned the largest freight brokerage in the southeast and was the father of my fiancé, Kaysen Ulran, the man I was set to marry in 21 days, in a chapel outside Asheville, North Carolina. Kaysen and I had met when his company hired my firm to restore an old tobacco warehouse into offices. He was not like the heirs I had met through that work. He brought me black coffee without asking, listened when I talked about mortar mixes, and proposed on a quiet bridge over the French Broad River. Now the cold looks Boyd gave me at Sunday dinners, the way he changed the subject when I mentioned Russell, made a cruel kind of sense. We were not only almost married, we were half-siblings, and Boyd had known the whole time. I did not sleep for 4 nights. In the quiet of the estate sale prep, I found a locked tin in my mother's sewing drawer with old bank statements inside. There were monthly deposits starting the year I was born, always from a holding company tied to Boyd Ulran, enough to cover a mortgage, and then some, labeled as consulting fees that my mother never ran a business to consult on. That was the price of her silence, paid so I could grow up thinking Russell was my father. Russell died when I was 9, a line worker who taught me to hammer straight and never explained why he looked at me like I was a wonder he did not earn. I drove to Boyd's office park in Knoxville with the letter in my coat. His receptionist waved me in like she had been told to expect a storm. Boyd read the paper, set it down, and said 2 words. How much? Not a denial. An offer. I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the vent above his desk. He knew his son was about to marry his own daughter, and he had let it ride because keeping the secret was cheaper than facing it. I went home and did what I know how to do, which is dig through records. Russell had been treated at a county clinic for most of his adult life, and I requested his old file under a state open records request after explaining I was next of kin. The report showed a vasectomy, complete and irreversible, performed 3 years before I was born after a workplace injury and a recommendation from his doctor. Russell could not have been my biological father. He had known, and he stayed. He registered me. He called me his girl. He fixed my bike and never once spoke a word about my mother's betrayal. That was the first time I cried not from pain, but from gratitude, because one man had chosen fatherhood when biology gave him an out. I called Cason and asked him to meet me at the warehouse we had restored, the one with the wide pine floors. I handed him the letter and the clinic record. He read them by the light of a single bulb and said, "I already knew." 6 months before, a male in Ancestry test he took as a joke matched him to a half-sister in Mississippi. He confronted Boyd, who told him the truth and talked him into silence, saying it would only bring needless hurt. Cason admitted he tried to tell me 3 times and chickened out each time because he could not stand to lose me. We drove to Boyd's house together, a stone place on a ridge with a flagpole and a quiet lake. Boyd confirmed it on his own porch, a short affair in 1991, the deal with Colleen to secure my future, and Russell's condition that Boyd never come near me. Boyd thought the secret was buried under money and time. Blood secrets do not stay buried. We cancelled the wedding that night, not with shouting, but with a signed note to the chapel and a refund to the caterer. It was not a lack of love that ended it. Some love cannot survive the truth stacked underneath it. Cason and I hugged in the parking lot of a diner on the way back, and he said he was sorry, the way a person is sorry for weather. I told him I was too. The weeks after were strange. I finished the courthouse job in a town called Hazelhurst and started sleeping with the window cracked the way my mother had. I wrote 2 letters. One went to Colleen in my mind, saying I forgave her because some truths do not destroy your life. They only show you were building on the wrong ground. The other was a short line to Russell, thanking him for choosing me when he did not have to. I did not send them. I kept them in the tin that once held the proof of my mother's silence. A year later, I took a contract in Santa Fe, New Mexico, restoring a mission wall covered in centuries of whitewash. I found a small carved bird under the 3rd layer, and I left it visible on purpose because hiding things only lets them rot. The freedom of the truth beat the prison of the comfortable lie, and I am rebuilding my own story now, brick by brick, with truth as the only foundation. If this story reached you, share it with someone who believes truth is worth more than comfort, and tell me in the comments whether you could forgive a secret like that. Follow the channel. Every week, there is a new story that can turn your whole world upside down. That evening by the river was the last time I saw Cason. He drove back to Knoxville the next morning, and I stayed in Santa Fe, letting the dry air and the endless sky work their way into my bones. The mission project took another 4 months. I worked with a team of local artisans, uncovering layers of paint and plaster that had been added over centuries. I used a scalpel to scrape away the lime wash, revealing a fresco of St. Francis that had been whitewashed during a reform. The colors were muted, but the image was clear. I documented every step, noting the pigments used, the brushstrokes that betrayed a human hand reaching across time. Each layer told a story of people trying to cover something up, to hide the past under a fresh coat. I felt a kinship with those walls. For so long I had been covering my own truth with the face of a happy future, but now I was peeling back the layers, exposing the original structure. One afternoon, a young woman named Marisol approached me while I was documenting a carving I had found. She was a history graduate student from the University of New Mexico, studying the mission's architectural history. She asked why I had left a small carved bird visible when I could have covered it again. "Because hiding things only lets them rot," I said. She nodded and told me about a local legend of a priest who had carved small animals into the mission as a way of coping with a secret. They say he was in love with a woman in the pueblo, but he had taken vows, so he carved birds and foxes into the walls, so that part of him could be seen without being spoken. I smiled. That's a kind of truth, imperfect but present. Marisol became a close friend. We had coffee often, and she knew about my past from a news article that had briefly covered the cancelled wedding. She never pressed for details, but she understood the weight of secrets. One Saturday, she brought me to her family's adobe house outside town, where her grandmother taught me to pat tortillas by hand. The rhythm of the dough under my palms settled something in my chest that had been fluttering since the night I read that letter. As the mission project neared completion, I received a letter forwarded from my old address in Mississippi. It was from Boyd Alron. He had been diagnosed with a degenerative condition, he wrote, and he wanted to make amends before it was too late. He offered to set up a trust in my name to compensate for the years of silence. I wrote back. I told him that no amount of money could replace the father I had in Russell, and that the best amends he could make was to tell the truth to his other children, to his board, to anyone who still believed the story he had sold. I did not ask for anything for myself. I signed it with my full name, Dornell Reichert, the name Russell had given me. I did not expect a reply. But 3 weeks later, a box arrived at the mission office. It contained a photograph of Boyd and a young woman I did not recognize, along with a note, "This is your grandmother. I'm sorry I tried to buy your silence. I'm telling the truth now." I felt a pang of something close to pity. I put the photograph in the tin with the other fragments of my past. Cason called me a week later. His voice was tired, but clear. "I read the letter you sent him," he said. "I don't know if he'll do what you asked, but I want you to know that I'm done with his silence. I've started talking to a therapist, and I'm working on being honest with myself. I even told my business partner the whole thing. He looked at me like I had two heads, but he said he respected it. Good, I said. That's all any of us can do. We talked for an hour, not about us, but about the weather, about our work, about the slow process of becoming people we could live with. He described a new project he was overseeing in Nashville, something to do with a music venue renovation. It was the first conversation we had ever had that did not feel like it was propped up on a broken foundation. That night I walked to the mission under a full moon. The restoration was almost finished. The bird carving was now a feature with a small plaque I had made that read, "Truth is the only foundation." I touched it with my fingertips and thought of Russell, of his hands that taught me to hammer straight, of his eyes that held no lie. I stood there until the moon shifted behind a cloud, and I realized I had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe had dropped. I had caught it, and now I could set it down. I was ready to go home. Not to Tupelo or Knoxville, but to a home I had not yet built. I applied for a position with the National Park Service, restoring historic structures in the Southwest. 3 weeks later, I was offered a job in Canyon de Chelly, Arizona, working on the ancient cliff dwellings. It was work that required patience, a steady hand, and a respect for the people who had built their lives into stone. Before I left Santa Fe, I bought a small notebook with a leather cover. On the first page, I wrote a line from the song my mother used to hum, "Come clean, like the rain on the window." I planned to fill the notebook with observations, with the stories I found in layers of paint and mortar, with the truths that the walls kept. I did not mourn the wedding that was never held. I did not mourn the brother I had almost married. I mourned the life I thought I was building, the one with a wedding and a future that belonged to someone else. But as I stood there with the notebook in my hands and the desert wind at my back, I understood that mourning was not an end. It was a clearing, a way to scrape away the layers of false color until the original surface showed through. I closed the cover and set the notebook beside the tin that held my mother's secrets and my grandmother's photograph. Then I walked out of the mission office and into the thin New Mexico light. The drive to Canyon de Chelly took the better part of a day. I crossed into Arizona past a stretch of red rock and sky so wide it made the horizon feel like a curve. The park superintendent, a woman named Elaine Hobdy, met me at the visitor center with a set of keys and a handshake that said she had seen restoration workers come and go. "You'll be on the White House ruins," she said. "Wind and flash floods have been pulling the plaster off the walls in sheets. I need someone who can stabilize without covering up what the ancestral Puebloans put there." I spent the first month on a scaffold inside a small kiva, working inch by inch with a soft brush and a mist bottle. The pigments under the soot were still alive, red ochre, a charcoal black, and a faint green that came from crushed copper. Someone had painted a line of dancers along the curve of the wall, their hands raised, their feet barely touching the ground. No one had tried to hide them. They had been left open to the air, and time had done the covering. I thought about the difference between that kind of truth and the one my mother had stitched into a quilt. One was meant to be seen, the other to be hidden. Both had survived. After a long shift, I would sit on the canyon rim and watch the shadows stretch. I started using the notebook I had bought in Santa Fe. I sketched the dancers, noting the direction of their hands and the way the pigment had leached into the stone. I wrote about Russell, how his hands had taught me to hold a hammer straight, and how that same steadiness now guided my brush. I wrote about Colleen, and I finally understood that her command to burn the quilt was not a lie. It was a last attempt to protect the daughter she loved from a wound she knew would cut deep. I forgave her completely. 2 years passed. I restored 3 more sites, trained a pair of interns from the Navajo Nation, and gave a talk at a college in Chinle about the ethics of uncovering hidden histories. The talk was recorded and posted online, and I received an email from Kaysen. He had watched it. "Your voice sounds like it belongs to someone who is no longer afraid," he wrote. "I'm glad. I'm still working on that myself." I wrote back a single line. "Keep scraping away the layers." He sent a thumbs up, and that was the last we exchanged. Near the end of my contract, I received a short letter from a law firm representing Boyd Alran. He had passed away from the degenerative condition he mentioned in his earlier letter. The firm enclosed a small envelope marked with my name. Inside was a photograph of Russell and Colleen standing together in front of a hardware store, both of them young and laughing, before I was born, before any of the secrets took root. On the back, in Boyd's handwriting, "I held onto this because it was the only proof I had that they were happy once. You should have it." I slid the photograph into the notebook next to the sketch of the dancers. The truth had many layers, and some of them were kind. On my last evening at Canyon de Chelly, I climbed the trail to the White House overlook and watched the last lights spill across the canyon walls. The dancers on the kiva wall were safe, stabilized, and visible. I had not hidden them. I had not covered them. I had let them remain as they were, honest, fragile, and unashamed. I touched the photograph in my pocket and felt something settle in my chest that had been loose for years. I did not mourn the wedding or the brother. I mourned only the weight of carrying a secret that was never mine to bear. And then I set that weight down, right there on the stone, and left it.